I'm really excited about this new series that we're going to start. In this series, we're going to focus on one of the greatest blessings that God gives us here on earth. And I want to start by looking at a verse in the Old Testament. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This greatest blessing that God gives us here on earth that we're going to be focusing on in this 4-part series is best friends. Best friends. Best friends are an incredible blessing from God in so many different ways. There's so much we could talk about and how much our life is blessed by the best friends that we have in our lives. But I think I can kind of lump all of those blessings together in 2 different ways. First, best friends are a gift that make life better. Best friends are a gift that just make life better. But then also, best friends are a tool that make us better. Best friends are a tool that make us better. That's a great summary of the role and the nature of the blessing that best friends really play in our lives. I think about best friends being a gift that make life better. I think back on my 54 years of this life, and I have so many incredible memories, so many incredible blessings. But I think about those, and I very rarely are any of those memories of me alone. The best memories, the best times, they included other people. I think about my wedding to my amazing wife. And of course, I picture her being there. I wasn't married alone, I was married to her. And then I picture my best friends standing around me in the wedding party and all the memories of those people around that time. I think about the birth of my 2 daughters. I have amazing daughters. And not only do I think of them as part of that blessing, obviously part of that memory, but I picture the friends that came and visited us in the hospital and prayed for us and encouraged us. And so those greatest memories are just surrounded by people. And it can be other more mundane things. I think of hunting and fishing adventures out in the field where I'm with Hans and Darren and Brian and Greg and Chester and so many other people. I just picture the friends that are around me there. Or I picture memories from the mission field. And I think about times over in Southeast Asia with great friends like Cesar Lopez and Ken Chow and Sakun Chanprada and so many others. Even a few years ago, going back over there with Brian and introducing Brian Campbell to Southeast Asia. I think of all the different kinds of memories I have, and they really are a blessing. They're a gift that make life better, these best friends being part of that time. And then I think of the other statement, best friends are a tool that make us better. I often think, where would I be today without best friends? Or who would I be today without best friends? I think about who would I be and where would I be if Kiffin Luce and Mark Van Tyne had not reached out to me many years ago when I was a student at Louisiana State University back in 1983. Where would I be without them being best friends sharing the gospel with me? Or I think about Ed Townsend, who discipled me in the Lord in those early years of ministry. He did a lot of the hard work, pulling out the weeds of pride and sin in my heart and transforming me. I think of where would I be and who would I be without him as a best friend. And then I think about Frank Kim, meeting him also there in San Francisco and then working with him and being a partner in the gospel with him over in Asia. And I think of all the challenges and the rebukes and the encouragements and visions. I think, where would I be? Who would I be without him in my life? And so many others, even nowadays. I think of Chip and Greg, 2 elders here in the church that we get together every week. And I think, where would I be without their guidance in my life? I think about all the elders and the staff. Where would I be without their support and them just encouraging me constantly and helping me to be my best for God? I think about my wife, Barry, and my 2 amazing girls, Jana and Marin, and now my son-in-law. And I think, where would I be without them to surround me and strengthen me? And I can go on and on. Where would I be Who would I be without best friends? All of life's greatest moments and greatest changes, they definitely come from God, but they almost always come through best friends. The greatest moments, the greatest memories, the greatest changes, they're from God, but they come through best friend relationships. So God created the whole concept of best friends, right? He created us. He knew we needed helpers suitable. He created the very first relationship with Adam and Eve, and He's designed us to need each other. He's created us to be interdependent. So He's created the whole idea of best friends. He knows how we can really have the best friend relationships possible. The Bible is chock full of examples of best friend relationships. When you think about the Bible, Old Testament to New Testament, what are some of the examples of best friends that come to your mind? Maybe they're people like Moses and Joshua, or all the sisters think of Naomi and Ruth, or Elijah and Elisha, or David and Nathan, or in the New Testament, Jesus and His disciples, or maybe Paul and Timothy and Titus. There's so many others. Like if you just had to brainstorm all of the best friend relationships in the Bible, it just goes on and on, because our relationship with God and our relationships with our best friends, they're really correlated. They're interdependent in each other. So in this series of sermons, what we're going to do is we're going to focus our study on 4 of the best examples of best friend relationships that there are in the Bible. And we're going to see what we can learn from those examples and see how we can be inspired by their examples, see how we can learn from their strengths and learn from their weaknesses, and see how we can be directed by their examples. We're going to look at 1 in the Old Testament and then 3 in the New Testament. So today we're going to dive in to this lesson 1 in best friends. And the first relationship we're going to look at is David and Jonathan. One of the best relationships there is when you think of the whole Bible and all that God has conveyed to best friends. At the top of most people's lists is David and Jonathan. So I'm going to share a lot about David and Jonathan, and we're first introduced into their relationship in 1 Samuel chapter 19. And we're going to read about that, but in order to get the most out of it, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of background. So just prior to this, Saul has been anointed, selected, chosen by God to be the first king of Israel. And when God first called him and made him king, Saul was awesome. Saul had an amazing son. His son was Jonathan. And Jonathan was known for his fierce faith and his fierce fighting. Jonathan was a stud. And so here's this incredible king and then his awesome son. And then sadly, over the years, we see that Saul's heart started to drift away from God. And so God got kind of fed up with it. And God goes, man, I'm not putting up with you anymore. I'm going to anoint a new king. And so He selects David just out of the blue, out of the shepherd flocks. I mean, David was a nobody. He was like carrying cheese to the front line of cheese and bread to the front line of the armies. He's like the original pizza delivery boy. I mean, he was nobody. And he shows up there, but God loved his heart. And God, through Samuel, anointed him as the new future king of Israel. Now, he didn't replace Saul right away. Saul was still the king. But David was anointed so that when Saul's reign ended, David was going to take over. So Jonathan, who was Saul's son, he wasn't anointed as king. But rather David, this kind of nobody, was. So you can see the challenge in relationships that's being set up between Saul, Jonathan, his son, and then David. Well, David, after he's anointed, before he's actually the king, he started doing some amazing things for God. He slayed Goliath. You remember that? He like held his head. I mean, he took him out with a sling. He slayed Goliath. People became just enamored with David. They're like, oh man, he slayed tens of thousands. He's more awesome than Saul. Saul started to get really jealous of David. He got jealous of David to the point that he was pursuing and persecuting, even trying to kill him. He would like throw spears and order his army to go out and try to kill David. And David's just running away from him. But this whole time, David knew he was the heir apparent. He knew he was going to get the throne, but he never got bitter. He never got defensive. He was always humble and submissive to Saul and just trusting that God was going to appoint him king whenever the time was. He kept forgiving Saul, even after trying to kill him. David just had such a pure heart. Well, then you could think that Jonathan, watching David be anointed as the future king instead of him, it was rightfully his throne, and seeing David get lifted up more than his dad, seeing his dad trying to kill David, you think that David would really despise, or that Jonathan would really despise David as well. But he didn't. Jonathan had such a pure heart. Jonathan didn't get bitter of David. He didn't get envious. There was no competition, but rather they became best friends. And their friendship became one for the ages. So it's such a great one to start with and to dive into and look at what made their relationship so special and so classic. We're going to look at three distinct characteristics of their relationship found in Scripture that really set it apart. And again, these characteristics of their relationship can apply to our lives. They can inspire us and direct us as well. The first of these characteristics, they were emotionally bonded. Emotionally bonded. Let's look at some examples of this in Scripture. 1 Samuel 19, verse 1 through 2. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there." So here you can see that Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and was protecting him. Chapter 20 in verse 16. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. So here you see they had this loving relationship. They reaffirmed their oath, their covenant with each other. He loved him as he loved himself. You know, the Bible said that. Love others as you love yourself. Here's Jonathan doing that. He loved David as he loved himself. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26. This was after Jonathan had been killed in battle. David says, "I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen." What a cool passage here. I mean, David's getting like really deep and emotional. He's like, "Man, you're like my best friend. I'm so sad that you're gone. Your love was amazing. Our love was just in a different class than what I've had with women. It was different. We bonded in a special bro kind of a way." And he got really emotional. That's really cool to see that, especially with dudes back in the day. And I want to ask you to think about your best friend relationships. How emotionally deep are you with your best friends? How emotionally deep are you? Now, you know, the women, they tend to be able to get really deep really fast. I mean, they can sit down in fellowship and in 30 seconds, they're like crying, they're hugging it out and everything. You're like, wow. I mean, they can really bond quickly, okay? Not all the time. They have their challenges too, but they just have a tendency to bond emotionally a little more readily than us dudes. But here you see, biblically, it wasn't intended to be that way. David and Jonathan were such a great example of having a deep emotional bond. So what about you, brothers? How deep is your emotional bond to other brothers? I think about some friends in my life. I think about, again, I mentioned him earlier, but Mark Van Tine. Mark and Lisa Van Tine, they've been partners in the gospel with us for 35 years. They go all the way back to our early days at Louisiana State University. Now we're still here together in the church in Denver. Man, we've had so many incredible memories and ups and downs together. For my 50th birthday a few years ago, Mark drove all the way down. It's like over an hour drive. Drove all the way down to my house and gave me this present, these pictures put together in a little album of some of our greatest memories together. And we just had a little bro moment, a little David and Jonathan moment, just reminiscing about the way God has really knit our lives together. I think about the Kims and the Jacobs. We've been partners in the gospel for over 30 years. We first started in the ministry together in San Francisco. Then we served together over in the Far East. Now we serve together here in Denver. Man, we've had so many laughs, So many tears, so many deep expressions of gratitude and affection and appreciation over the years. I think about the Jacksons, the Roberts, the Rasmussens, the Cooks, the Umagins. These are incredible couples that we're surrounded with here. And we've been partners in the gospel for over 20 years. So many incredible times together. And the Chanpridas, we were partners in gospel with them way over in Asia. They're visiting in Denver right now. And we've had great times just rekindling that emotional bond. Those are relationships from the far past, but we've been able to get even emotionally deep with new relationships. I think of Larry and Nancy. There's some friends we've been studying the Bible with and reaching out to and bonding with. Had dinner with them last night till the wee hours of the morning. Just really gotten emotionally deep in a relatively short period of time. I think, man, where would I be without that emotional bond in those relationships? So David and Jonathan were emotionally bonded. Then another characteristic we see, they were spiritually devoted. They were spiritually devoted. Great example of this in 1 Samuel 23 in verse 15. While David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. I love this passage. Here, David, he's on the run. I mean, he's just like a step away from death as Saul, the king, is pursuing him. He could have stopped and said, listen, I'm the next king, and ordered the troops to defend him. But he didn't. He just kept humbly on the run. And he was struggling. He's like, man, what's going on here? And so Jonathan went out to meet him at the risk of his life, because it's his dad that is trying to kill David. And he goes out, and it says this one line. He helped David find strength in God. How cool is that? I often wonder, how did he do that? How did Jonathan help David find strength in God? What did that look like? Did they pray together? Maybe that's what they did. Maybe they looked out, from a cave. David was hiding in caves. They looked up at the stars and just prayed together late at night. Or maybe that's when David penned a few psalms. And maybe Jonathan and David wrote some psalms together and then sang them together to God. Or maybe Jonathan just pointed David to God and shared encouraging things. Remember, God has anointed you. Remember, God has called you. Remember the Lord, and remember how he's fought for his people. Maybe he just reminded him of that. Maybe he challenged David to have deep faith. Maybe he looked him in the eyes and rebuked his lack of faith and said, come on, you got to believe in the promise of God. We have no idea what it was or how it took place, but the result was Jonathan helped David find strength in God. David needed Jonathan to find God. As awesome as David's heart for God was, remember, God himself says, he's a man after my own heart. As awesome as David's heart for God was, he needed Jonathan to find strength in God. Maybe David remembered that. Later on, several chapters later, in 1 Samuel chapter 30, David is getting destroyed by the Amalekites. All of David's mighty men are bitter in spirit. They're picking up stones. They're thinking about stoning him. They're talking about killing David. David's feeling all alone. His wives had been captured. His city had been burned to the ground at Ziklag. And he's just thinking, man, what in the world is going on? Then it says, but David found strength in the Lord his God. David just went out. Jonathan wasn't there, but I kind of wonder, the way Jonathan had helped David find strength in God, maybe he remembered that this time later when he goes, I remember what Jonathan did. I'm going to go out and find strength in the Lord my God. Maybe Jonathan played a role in that. It's interesting to note, and this is only speculation, but it was only after the death of Jonathan that David started to spiral down in his walk with God. That's when he fell into sin with Bathsheba. That's when he had her husband murdered. That's when he lied for 3 years to all the people. Jonathan wasn't there. And sometimes I wonder, would David have sinned if Jonathan were there? What would Jonathan have said? How would Jonathan have helped him? I can't help but think David would have been on a lot better footing if Jonathan had still been alive with him, because they helped each other spiritually. How spiritually devoted are you with your best friends? Think about your best friend relationships. Maybe it's with your kids, your spouse, another brother, another sister, people at work, whatever, whoever. When you think about those relationships, how spiritually devoted are you to one another? How are you helping each other find strength in God? What was a way that somebody helped you find strength in God? Who were they? What was a way that you helped somebody else find strength in God? Who were they? And you think about your life now, the prayer times, the deep talks, the comforting words, the serving one another, confronting weaknesses, visionary encouragement. How much of this is going on in your life and in your relationships to help each other find strength in God? Who can you extend that spiritual devotion to? Who do you have now that you go, we need to renew our covenant to be spiritually devoted to one another? But who else is new out there that you go, I need to start being spiritually devoted to that person or to that person? How can you extend your spiritual devotion to others? So we see here with David and Jonathan, they were emotionally bonded. They were spiritually devoted. And then a final characteristic, they were unconditionally supported. I really like this one, unconditionally supported. Look at a great verse, 1 Samuel 20, verse 4. As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death. Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. How cool is that? Here it's David talking first, and David says, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I'm only a step away from death. I mean, death was right on his heels, literally through Jonathan's dad, Saul. I mean, he's about to die at any minute. He's like, man, as surely as God lives, no exaggeration, I'm about to die. And then Jonathan's response to him, even though it's his dad that's trying to kill David, is to say this, hey man, whatever you want me to do for you, I'll do for you. What an unconditional word, whatever. What an unconditional promise, I will do for you. Whatever you want, I will do. Unconditionally supported. And then you look, and there's too many verses to read through. I'll just reference these. Chapter 19, verse 2, Jonathan put this into practice. He warned David about what was going on, that death was in front of him, how to escape his father. Chapter 19, verse 4, he spoke well of David to Saul. He's like saying good things about David to Saul, his dad, trying to get him to change his mind about David. Chapter 20, verse 16, he made this covenant of love to protect David to the very end. Chapter 20, verse 42, they swore their friendship to each other again. Chapter 23, verse 16, he went to David, as we just saw, when David was in need. Chapter 23, verse 18, he made another covenant before the Lord between him and the house of David. They were just totally unconditionally supportive of one another. And you think about your life. Who are you unconditionally committed to? How supportive are you of your friends, your family, your spouse, the people that God has put in your life through their good times and their bad times, through their good report, their bad report, through their ups and their downs? How unconditional is your support for those people when they need you the most? Have you made a covenant of friendship with a few people around you? That's kind of a cool thing to do. You read through the story of David and Jonathan, you read it with them and you go, hey bro, you know what? Let's be brothers. I remember in the old days when I was a kid, I think I saw it like in a Western movie or something, that people would be like blood brothers. It was like an Indian and a cowboy or something. And I guess it started with the Indians. Cowboys wouldn't do that kind of thing, but the Indian would like cut his hand and it'd bleed. Then the other Indian cut his hand, it'd bleed. And then they just lock arms like that. And they're like blood brothers. That was like their bond, their covenant. So me and my friends were like, let's do that. We had this little knife. We're like, you're just like a little prick of blood. We're like, ah, and then we like mashed it together there. This was like pre-AIDS days and stuff like that. Mashed it together and we're like, yeah, covenant of love, of friendship with one another. That's kind of a cool thing to do, especially because it's rooted in one of the best friendships in the Bible. Who can you make that kind of covenant with? Who are the few people in your life that you have that kind of relationship with? Or who are the few more people that maybe you can begin to build that kind of relationship with? No wonder Jonathan and David were best friends. No wonder they were best friends. Their relationship had these characteristics that made it one for the ages. They were emotionally bonded. They were spiritually devoted. And they were unconditionally supported in the relationship. We can all deepen the best friend relationships we have by imitating them. And we can also all broaden the number of relationships we have by imitating them. Let's all make effort to do that, to deepen the best friends we already have and to broaden those relationships to include more best friends.